How are you? Well, I'm here to do another little walk of a neighborhood here on the water. Very nice. Gonna do the neighborhood of Long Island City today. Very nice little area here. You may know it from all of the giant glass high-rises everywhere, but there's a lot of history here we're gonna cover today. Eric, how in God's name are you?
Production values behind you.
Pretty amazing. We're just roughing it here in the park. But we're going to talk about all that. We're going to talk about everything. Before we start, guys, check out the Patreon. Huge help. That's how I fund these things. There's extras on there. You know, let's do it, man. Let's grow this thing. Come on. Giving you lots of stuff here. Also, to like and subscribe. Go ahead and just hit the freaking buttons. You know, you're going to learn a lot here. You're going to like it. So help bump me in the algorithm ahead all the jet ski fails or whatever people are watching. Okay, well, look, I don't want to ramble too much. I think we should just start this thing. Eric, what do you say we start?
I say we start.
You do say we start.
I do.
Let's do it. Okay, so why don't we just start from the beginning? This whole area that is known as Long Island City was actually a big hodgepodge of different neighborhoods in this area. Now, it was all pretty much farmland. Most of Queens was actually pretty much farmland for a very long time. It didn't actually develop as quickly as, let's say, Brooklyn. So this area was all farmland up until, you know, like even the Revolutionary War, there was only about like 10 farms in this whole area. Two of the families that owned a lot of that land were the Rikers family. Rikers Island. Look at that. One day I'll do a tour of that place. And you have the Bogardus family. Everardisco Bogardus. That was the guy's pretty cool name. He actually left his land to his widow because he was lost at sea. That's a way to go right there, getting lost at sea. Pretty cool. Oh, did you hear about Everardus? Oh yeah, what happened? They lost at sea. Ah, dang. Let's go grab a burger. I guess you could still actually get lost at sea just on a Royal Caribbean cruise or something. I don't know. Not as romantic. Anyways, this was all just owned by a few families until the mid-1800s. You had Union College buying up a lot of this land. And a terminus for the Long Island Railroad from Brooklyn was actually set up here. So inns and taverns and things like that started to set up around it. In 1869, a petition is sent to the state legislature to create Long Island City and to take in some of the areas around here. Some of those areas included Hunters Point, Astoria, parts of Newtown, and also Ravenswood. That's the name of a place. Ravenswood was all like these little fancy villas along the water. Ravenswood sounds like a, you know, Game of Thrones house. I come from the house of Ravenswood. We come bearing gifts of Lululemon and strollers. All right, turned Australian there for a second. All these were swallowed up into Long Island City in 1870 when it was consolidated as an actual city. Now keep in mind, Queens County was a county, so just like Kings County, which is Brooklyn, that was created while the British were still in control of New York before the Revolution. But Brooklyn was a city when it consolidated. I'll talk about this later. Queens was a county, and Long Island City was one of the cities within this county, which is why you have this here. This is the courthouse. This was built in 1872. Pretty nice, huh? Some important trials took place here, actually. The trial in the 1920s of Ruth Snyder, who we talked about in the Queens, Dark Side of Queens video. You know, watch that. She was a woman who killed her husband with her lover, and she went to the electric chair. Someone snuck in like a little camera and took a picture while she was getting electrocuted. Trigger warning, I'll show you a little picture now. So, there you go. But yeah, and also Willie Sutton was tried here. He was a famous bank robber, you know, robbed dozens of banks. They actually asked him here, supposedly, you know, why do you rob banks? And he said, because that's where the money is. Smart guy. Very pretty neoclassical. Peter Coco is the name of the architect. It's a pretty cool name. So this is when they first incorporated in 1870. Yeah, they later on, 1872, they started building this courthouse, 1876. So then we get into the actual existence of this as a city, which was short-lived because it eventually got pulled into New York City. But let's talk about that at our next stop. All right, so May 4th, 1870. The city of Long Island City is created. All right, great. In 1872, actually, it becomes the seat of Queens County, which is kind of important as well. That's actually what we're talking about, the courthouse. That was when the courthouse was built, all those things. It became the seat, the kind of center of the whole county. So it was a really big kind of area. It struggled to get its footing initially. It actually didn't have that too many residents for such a big area. It was like 12,000, 15,000 people. It also had a trouble setting up its own fire department. It was kind of a mess, but it did have one thing going for it: lots of corrupt politicians. That's kind of what it was famous for in its short existence from 1870 to 1898, when it actually was pulled into greater New York City. So keep in mind that in 1870s or 1860s, that was like the high time. That was like the peak time for corrupt politicians. This was the time of William Boss Tweed, where Tammany Hall had its kind of strongest pull around the city. And they were kind of like the rock stars. They were kind of like the K-pop stars of New York. All the corrupt politicians, they were all, everyone loved them. They were all over the place, and they were all Korean boys. No, that's not true. They were very popular, and this was no exception. So initially, the first mayor here was actually named Abram Ditmars. He was actually kind of honest, which is why he quit. He was like, I can't deal with this anymore. He was actually replaced eventually by a guy named Henry Debevoise, who was incredibly corrupt. He put all his friends in, he gave lots of contracts away, and almost bankrupted the city. That was bad. Then after him came one of the most notorious of all. From 1887 to 1897, the mayor of Long Island City was Paddy Gleason. He was an Irish immigrant who basically worked his way up, and he took what he thought was his, and he just basically, as the mayor, gave himself contracts, bought land from himself for exorbitant amounts, did whatever he wanted, because he made it to where he was, and screw it. Which is not too far from, I think, the thinking of lots of politicians today. But he basically got there and made all this. His nickname was the Battle Axe, because he actually showed up to kind of hack away at things that were blocking a street by the Long Island Railroad was blocking something. So he just started hacking away at fences and everything with the Battle Axe. That's a pretty cool nickname, though, Battle Axe. What would my nickname be?
Hatchet Face, something like that.
Hatchet Face. Good Lord. Maybe just Tom the Tool Delgado. Right back to high school with those nicknames. Anyways, he lived on the street where I'm at right now. This is actually the Hunters Point Historic District. Pretty cool area with lots of different types of architecture, very beautiful. This was all developed after the city got its kind of recognition. So in the 1880s, 1890s, this whole area was kind of developed, townhouses and things for the people who wanted to move out here, or the people who worked here, had businesses and all that kind of stuff. It was basically for all the people here who wanted to get away from the the hoi polloi, if you will. That's a good word right there, hoi polloi. Yeah, it's like the riffraff, I guess. You're learning stuff, vocabulary too. So this was.
Install Wikipedia on that cell phone of yours?
No, I have not. It doesn't. No apps on my flip phone. There's only one app. It's called Being Present. Hello. I use that one all the time. Okay. Anyways, all right, well, this is the Hunters Point Historic District. Like I said, very nice, late 1800s, right before the city would consolidate with the bigger city of New York, and we'll talk about that in our next stop. Okay, so once Long Island City got rolling, it wasn't long before it was pulled into the rest of New York City, and one of the most important events in New York City history. You got to know this, okay? If you know anything about New York, you got to know about the consolidation of 1898. That is when New York City became the 5 boroughs of New York. I mean, think about it. It's what allows New York to be as gigantic as it is. I mean, think about Queens. Queens is 5 times about the size of Manhattan. It's huge. It's what allows immigrants and artists to come here today and live outside of Manhattan, which is pretty much unaffordable. Queens was pulled in as a county, and along with it was pulled in Long Island City, along with other towns like Flushing and Newtown. So I'm standing in front of the Queensboro Bridge, also known as the 59th Street Bridge from people in Manhattan. But don't be in Queens and call it the 59th Street Bridge, or you'll get thrown into a vat of hot dog water. It's the Queensboro Bridge. No one calls it the Ed Koch Bridge, but anyways, this was built in 1909. So when it consolidated, New York City took a renewed interest in connecting Queens to the rest of Manhattan. 1909. Now with this also came lots of speculation. I've talked about this in other videos. Remember, Jackson Heights was pretty much created from scratch. Once the Queensboro Bridge was announced, the Queensboro Corporation basically went up and scooped up tons of land, started to develop it. It's not actually elevated. They called it Jackson Heights because places like Brooklyn Heights, etc., it's kind of a cool thing to have the name Heights attached to your place. So because of that, it was actually, you know, how you doing? It was because of that they thought it'd make it fancy, you know. That reminds me, Eric, remember, you gotta name your apartment Eric 13 Heights. Remember that.
Yeah, I'll remember that.
And then it'll be, in 6 months, you'll have a CrossFit gym. In 1917 also, you had the IRT come through. The elevated rail comes through, connects Queens Plaza to Manhattan. That also boosts speculation. So remember, Brooklyn, when it consolidated, was already kind of developed. It was already its own city, it had its own infrastructure, etc. Queens basically took off as soon as it consolidated with the rest of New York City. That's when it started to boom. But if the 1800s were the, you know, century of Brooklyn, well then the 1900s were the century of, yes, Queens.
No. No.
And Long Island City was no exception. You had lots more industry coming in. You had more homes being built. You had it basically taking off. Now, after around the Great Depression and everything, things started to take a dip. And you will see at Queensbridge houses, named that because of their proximity to the Queensboro Bridge, you know, how that was addressed. Largest housing project in the country, which is where we're going to stop next. What do you think, Eric? Should we just go?
Let's just go.
Let's just go. Let's not just do anything, let's go. All right, so as the neighborhood of Long Island City became like an industrial center, more and more people came here looking for jobs. But as World War II kind of started approaching, industry started leaving the cities. They kind of went outside of the cities. Trucking picked up, shipping went down in New York. Land was cheaper outside of the city. Highways were developed, so people were like, let's get the hell out of here. Leaving the people who came to neighborhoods like this looking for work without jobs. And behind me is the Queensbridge houses. These were built in 1939 by Fiorello LaGuardia, around the same time he made the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA. These were built in 1939 and are the largest housing project in the entire country. Kind of wild. Now at first these were mostly white. Over time, a few years later, they lowered the limit to, in essence, segregate them and make the poorest of the poor here, making it mostly black and Latino. This is also coinciding with a time where most manufacturing and industry left the neighborhood, unfortunately, so there were no jobs. And that was kind of what brought the neighborhood down. But at the same time, this neighborhood was able to foster some culture. This is actually one of the more important hip-hop spots in New York City, where hip-hop kind of thrived. In the 1980s, you had people like MC Shan, Marley Marl, who were very important figures in hip-hop around the time. And then in the early 90s, it kind of made a resurgence here after kind of being crapped on by in the Bronx. In fact, BDP, Boogie Down Productions, was part of it. KRS-One was part of it, actually came out with a song called Bridges Over, saying that they had been kind of going down. But then in 1994, an artist by the name of Nasir Jones, or Nas, released the album Illmatic, and right behind me is the view of the Queensbridge projects that they used for the cover of the album. Pretty cool, huh? But you got to keep in mind that from the 1950s and 1970s, you had a complete loss of factory and manufacturing jobs. From 50 to 75, actually, 66% of the manufacturing and factory jobs in New York City just disappeared. And in neighborhoods like this, where it was mostly industry, that was really felt. Big problem. In addition, you had federal and state disinvestment from the cities, making the cities fall even worse. And that's one of the problems you have today, and one of the reasons why cities are left to fend for themselves and appeal to their tax base, or the rich people who pay more taxes, right? And in all that, Nas was able to release one of the most important albums of all time in hip-hop. Right behind Weird Al Yankovic's Bad Hair Day, I bet. But pretty cool how that can happen. For now, we'll talk about this and keep it moving, baby. What do you think, Eric? A lot of commotion around here. Let's get out of here. All right. Okay, so I'm here in my "You kids got any doobies" look. I have my backwards hat. I know I look like a narc, but you know, it's the lighting, all right? But I'm here to talk to you guys about how, like a lot of New York, and like lots of industrial neighborhoods in New York, eventually, after being kind of depressed and downtrodden for a little while, guess who moves into the neighborhood, Eric?
Who?
Artists.
Amazing.
I wasn't looking for like a particular person, but yeah, artists move in. This is a good example. I'm actually in front of MoMa PS1. So Alana Heiss in 1971 started the Institute for Art and Urban Spaces, where she would take over unused urban spaces and basically make them into artist studios and exhibition spaces and things like that. In 1976, she took over this school that was located here. It's PS1, the first school here in Long Island City that was opened in 1892, a little Romanesque revival building, very pretty, which if you're trying to get kids to go to an art museum, there are probably better places to pick than a school. But you know, she had this set up, artists would start coming here, and we're here and are still here today. MoMA took over in, and combined in 2010, I'm sorry, in 2000, and then they gave it the name in 2010 of MoMA PS1. Another example is Silver Cup Studios, which is right near here, a very famous little sign you might see when you cross the bridge. It was actually a bakery for decades until 1974 when there was a big strike, and the workers there were like, you know, let's be fair here, and the place was just like, you know what, rather than be fair, why don't we just close this thing down? So in 1975 it closed down completely. It was bought up in the 1980s, and in 1983 was actually created into movie studios. Kind of interesting. It was only one soundstage initially. Today it's over 18 sound stages, and they filmed some American classics there. Things like Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York, and What Happens in Vegas.
I don't know that one.
Ashton Kutcher. They even filmed some classic TV there as well. Things like Sex and the City, 30 Rock. They filmed You there. I actually had a high schooler like chase me down the other day just to tell me that I looked like the serial killer guy from You. I don't think I have much in common with that guy, except that I do kind of look like a serial killer. I'll grant that. All right. Also, right across the street is the building that replaced what was there before, which was Five Points. So in 1892, a factory was opened there for a water meter company, the Neptune Water Meter Company. And in 1970s, it was bought by the Walkoff family. And in the 1990s, they were leased out as artist spaces. There was over 200 artist studios in this place, and they allowed the artists to cover the entire building in graffiti. Well, not graffiti, but street art, pretty much. And people came from all over the world. Street artists and you know, aerosol artists came from all over the world to cover this thing. It was like one of the coolest buildings in the neighborhood. But as the neighborhood got more expensive, it got a higher price tag. And in 2013, the artists saw the writing on the wall, literally, and they actually, sorry, but anyways, they started a push to try to get landmark status for the art that they took so many years to create. And the Walkoff family just whitewashed over it. Overnight, one night, they brought police to protect the people painting and just whitewashed the whole thing. The artists were kind of distraught and sued. And in case you're thinking like, well, that's their building, they could do whatever they want. Yeah, it's true, but that art kind of gave the building a different meaning, gave a different, you know, value, and they won. So eat that. They won like, I think almost $7 million. I just picture like a grumpy old man painting and being like, dang kids or something. And instead of riding by on bikes and egging him, they sued him for $7 million. So good for them. And go figure, to add insult to injury, when they actually developed these two giant high rises that are there today, they gave them the name Five Points. They named the buildings the 5 Points, and they got like the cool, like hip 5 Points, you know, font, you know, all that kind of stuff. So go figure, what can you do? Apparently they're having a hard time renting those things out, or, you know, whatever, but they kind of shoddy workmanship apparently from some of the articles. And so that's kind of what happened. Artists kind of started moving into the neighborhood, give it a little different vibe, and kind of hinting at what's coming here in the next spot with that last story. But what do you say we keep moving, Eric?
Why don't we start moving?
That's right. Let's move. Okay, and that leads us here. I'm here on the waterfront in Long Island City, just totes cash, as the kids say, you know, hanging out. Nice view behind me. This is Gantry Plaza State Park. Called that because it's a gantry. Gantry is like a thing that lowers and raises stuff, like a kind of a crane for railroads and shipyards. So that leads us to what I'm going to talk about now, which is the development of this neighborhood. Long Island City is also famous today for all of its glass boxes everywhere. I'm not a huge fan. It makes it look like Anytown, USA to me, but you know, I guess you got your amenities. This area was one of the first areas to kind of be developed. This is called Queens West here, at Hunters Point on the water. A few dozen acres, I think it's like close to 70 acres, this whole area. But as early as the 1980s, they were trying to kind of develop this area. The Port Authority was involved. They were trying to figure out things to do with the industrial stuff that sat unused on the waterfront here in Long Island City. This has all been completed actually kind of recently here, Hunters Point South, up in like 2014, 2015. It's kind of dramatic. You can see a before and after picture of what it used to look like here just 10 years ago. So 1980s, you had the first talks of Queens West going up. Like I said, Hunters Point South here is part of the Queens West. It didn't go up till the 2015, 2014 years. But other projects and other businesses kind of came in as well. Office space and things close to the Court Square area, Queens Plaza area. For example, JetBlue is headquartered here. If you guys know JetBlue, they moved their offices from Forest Hills, where it started actually in the late 90s. In fact, first actual flight they ever flew, Fort Lauderdale, baby. The 6th borough. I'm sure the CEO was going to visit his grandparents or something, but that was the first ever flight, and it was a New York airline. Kind of interesting. In fact, they're actually in talks right now to buy Spirit Airlines. They're actually like reviewing it, the DOJ and all that stuff, that merger. I imagine the CEO is buying it because that's the only way he could get on the flight without having to pay for baggage, buy the whole airline. Also, 2001, over near Court Square area, there was also a rezoning. Remember the word rezoning. This is very important. Rezonings happen when the city wants to kind of change the character of a neighborhood. This was always industrial, right? So they rezoned that area to high density residential. However, they tapped into a market that was kind of white hot. While they had predicted about like 300 new units of housing, there have been over 13,000 units of housing, and 95% of it was market rate, meaning that it is very expensive. Flooding the neighborhood, flooding the infrastructure, putting a lot of pressure on it. So you had Queens West, later on you had that rezoning in 2001. All these things kind of changing the neighborhood today and making it pretty expensive, but still nice. You can see the views here, very nice place to go for a little walk, you know? So you also have other buildings, famous buildings built. There's the Citigroup building. It's not the Citi building anymore. I think it's the Altice or Altice building. They changed the name on it, but that was built in the late 1980s, and it was the tallest building in Long Island until very recently, actually. It had been surpassed. Even here in Queens, it got surpassed by the Skyline building. The Citigroup building was offices. I bet you can't guess what the Skyline building is, Eric.
What is the Skyline building?
Condos, baby. Everything in New York is condos or luxury apartments. That trash can right over there, that's condos. Costs $4,000 a month to live in that thing. Also, you had the Pepsi Cola sign, which is actually right here on the water. It actually dates back to a bottling plant that was put here in 1940. Pretty cool. A little Pepsi Cola. Long Island City. Is Pepsi okay? You have all this stuff here on the water. Very pretty. You know, not cheap. Got some nice views. That's the name of the game here in Long Island City today. It's being redeveloped and being, you know, I guess, what's the word I want to look for, Eric?
Gentrified?
Yeah, gentrified. I mean, it's kind of at the end, but it has been gentrified. Okay, well, this is it. This is kind of the present state. A lot of development, baby, a lot of development. So
I'm gonna get off the water, Tom. I'm gonna blow away.
you're gonna blow away. We got to get some meat on those bones, man. We got to get you to beef up. Ooh, look at me. Look who's talking.
Wow.
Okay, let's keep it moving. Just casually taking in the views here. Ah, how totes fresh. Guys, we learned a lot today. I mean, we're here on the waterfront. A lot of construction here, more construction going up, so it's a very quickly growing neighborhood. We learned that it started out as farmland. Then we learned that it became, you know, in like a short amount of time, it became industry, then the industry went down, then it became an artist stronghold, and then it became what it is today. Wow, that's the story of New York, really. We did it, guys. If you like the video, please check out the Patreon. That is a huge help. There's all kinds of levels. Whatever you can give helps. That's how we grow this thing. Because Lord knows I ain't getting no empanada endorsement deals here. Or Lululemon or whatever the hell people do. Also, too, like and subscribe. Just go ahead and do that. Let's get up to that top of that algorithm next to Mr. Beast and Mrs. Beast or whoever is up there.
I like your impression, by the way, of the people who watch it. It's like Lululemon, empanadas. I don't know what you guys like.
I don't know. I'm a lost soul. we did it though. Either way, we did do it. We finished. Every time we do these, I never ceases to amaze me. We actually get these done, Eric. But that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See y'all later. That's it.